to start?
Let's talk about that. We have some news. We need to talk.
Okay. Happy Valentine's Week, Ren Fam, and what a better way to celebrate this week by talking about relationships and communication. The next point, and another one of the really most important pieces of communicating, specifically in a romantic relationship. Obviously there's communication in every relationship, but we're kind of talking mostly about romantic relationships, is communicating in a loving way. And so this actually applies a lot to parenting as well. When you communicate something to someone you love, but you don't do it lovingly, they're not really going to hear you, or it's not going to be as effective as if you communicate what you're trying to say in a loving way so that the person that's receiving it feels and understands and comprehends that what you are saying because you love them. I think a lot of couples get to this point where when they're having arguments, or even if your relationship is at a level where anytime you communicate, the way that it comes across is not loving, that can create lots of problems, and it can make your communication very ineffective, because if everything I say to him is just very demeaning or patronizing,
Me.
or just mean, then that person is gonna turn you off right as you're talking, because they don't want to hear that if you're just criticizing them and you're just unloving towards them. When you're communicating with love, they're going to receive that better, and your communication is just going to be better in general.
Are you using the majority of your words talking to and about your spouse in a way that encourages and lifts them up, that it motivates them? If you're even 1 degree off and you're not using a majority of your words, you likely have a long ways to go. The goal is that everything we say lifts up, everything we say sharpens, everything we say makes our spouse holier. That takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort, and it's not something that most people will ever have come naturally. There's a big difference between talking at someone, talking to someone, talking about someone, and loving someone.
You're gonna hear Ruben pooping in the background.
Mm-hmm. Matthew 7:1 says, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be used to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, then you'll be able to see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." I've often heard Christians and people in general quote this as a way to say, "Don't judge me, you don't know my life." And I think you're really taking that verse out of context. First of all, can you imagine a world where people didn't judge? Period. Anyone ever? Businessmen and women not judging if somebody's going to pay the bill? Not judging how to use credit, risk. There's a judgment in life. You can't get away from it. Solomon asked for wisdom to be a good judge. God appointed judges. That verse is not saying, don't ever look at anyone and not come to a conclusion about their life and their interactions and their decisions. In fact, it does not say, don't ever take the speck out of your brother's eye. First, you need to judge yourself very, very harshly. You need to understand what your faults are. You need to be humble. You need to take away your own pride. And when you judge, I've heard it stated this way, don't judge as an enemy storming a city to take it over and kill everyone. Instead, when you judge as a doctor, carefully looking at a patient and deciding what needs to be done to save this patient's life. Can you imagine not giving a medication because I don't want to judge your personal decisions? If you made a mistake and your arm's broken, I'm not going to judge that. No, not at all. The point of that is to say, judge in such a way to save someone. In the same way that you want to be judged, because you will be. There will be a judgment. It's not about not having judgment. It's about judging out of love.
Can you tell he's a preacher?
In addition to communicating with love, I would say that this is the same thing stated in a different way, and that's fight fair. If you're communicating with love, you're fighting fair. However, if you're struggling with communicating with love, you're probably struggling with fighting fair. If you're fighting a lot, maybe it's easier to start fighting fair first. And what that means is that when there's tension, there will always be tension. When there's conflict, there will always be conflict. When that happens, go into those situations, those moments of tension, those moments of conflict with love. Don't do it in such a way to harm the other person. Don't name call, don't bring up history that doesn't need to be brought up. Don't sit there and try and win. That is not the way to fight fair. The way to fight fair is to do it in such a way to where both of you can win. I promise you, this is a solution to tension. I promise you that with compromise, with love, with communication, you can walk out of your fights, out of your moments of conflict, with both people going, I love you more than before we went in. That is the salvation of reconciliation that Jesus gave to us. It is the original design for humanity. And that's why we have that great example of what it means to have a high priest, what it means to have somebody that's loving, what it means to have that leader in Scripture.
Specifically when you're communicating and you're not agreeing on something, when you view the conversation not as who needs to win or who's gonna win, but we're both on the same team, we're on the same side, and we're just trying to come up with a solution. This isn't me against you. And so when you look at it that way, it helps you to approach the conversation differently, because so often it's almost like this natural instinct within us as humans where we just want to fight someone, you want to be opposed to them, and sometimes it feels good to be angry and to try and get your point across, but that's only going to make your communication worse. It's going to make you as a couple be further apart, and it's not going to help anything. If you can see yourselves on the same team at all times, then your communication is going to be different because you're not fighting, you're communicating about something you disagree on.
A lot of people watching this as well will be very, very, very well rehearsed in several models of communication. I know I've heard of people who have been through counseling before, they've been through therapy, they know how to express themselves, they know how to speak to these issues. I know people who are very good at motivational speeches, they may be very good at persuasive speeches, they may sell for their living. When you run into those types of people, I often see this weird dichotomy where one person is so good at, I'm going to use this word very carefully, but I'm using it on purpose, manipulating, that they say, well, I am fighting fair. Well, are you really taking yourself and your wishes and putting them aside so that you can be sacrificial to your spouse? Are you putting them ahead of yourself? Christ loves us, and we are to love each other as Christ loves the church. That's the image of marriage.
The last point that I wanted to make in this video, and we'll do it quickly because the baby's starting to wake up, but that is something that I kind of came to over the last 8 years of being married and kind of looking at our marriage, with the perspective of having time behind us and saying there are certain things that we've been able to see our communication shift over the years. And that is that always strive to over communicate, because it's nearly impossible to actually over communicate about something. There may be very few situations where a couple does get to the point where they have over communicated something, but in general, specifically with things like intimacy, finances, kids, just kind of the main things that you have to communicate on a daily basis and throughout your whole marriage. Just make it your goal to over communicate, because the more you communicate, the better it's going to be. Even if your communication for a very long time is arguing or disagreeing about something, you're never going to get to the point where you do agree unless you argue about it, unless you are in this communication. And you might feel like you're going in circles, and you might feel like, okay, we need to stop talking about this because we're getting nowhere. I've seen in our relationship, specifically I can think about our communication about intimacy, and it took us so long to get to the point where we understood each other and how our spouse felt as far as intimacy and our needs, what we like, what we don't like how do we need to interact with each other in that area. And it just took talk after talk after talk where we just kind of sat there and let each other know how we felt. And sometimes that looked like an argument because I didn't quite understand what he meant, and sometimes it felt like I don't really want to say this because they're gonna feel bad because, they aren't doing what I really want them to do in that area. But you have to strive for that over communication and just keep at it and keep at it. And even when those conversations are just really hard and challenging and it's not fun to have them, in the grand scheme of your communication as a couple, they're very necessary. And so don't avoid communication because you disagree with your spouse. Even and especially when you disagree, you need to communicate about it, because otherwise you're just going to continue being in that place of negativity and you're never going to move forward. We went through years of not understanding each other when it came to intimacy, but through the last 8 years of just continuing to kind of beat the dead horse and just continue to talk about it, we're at a great place right now. Are you blowing on his head?
He's got something on his hair.
We're at the point now where we're at a really good place because we continued to have those really hard conversations. Even times where we would have to say something really hard to the other person that they may not want to hear, and it was hard for them to stomach, but in the end it was good to say.
If you're running into the same conversation over and over again, it may be time for counseling. And counseling doesn't mean you go to a therapist and you go to a psychiatrist, you get medication. We go to a shrink, each of you, lay in this chair and muse about your histories. It's not what counseling is. Counseling is as simple as going to a pastor, going to a friend who has a great marriage and going, hey, we're struggling with this, and getting somebody to hear. That is a method of communicating.
Yeah.
And don't look past that. Most of the time, it doesn't solve the issue. It just gives you a new way of looking at it. You are the only ones that can solve the issue.
Yeah.
So that being said, counseling is good. Counseling is healthy. Additional to that, be careful. I'm going to talk to all the ladies. Be careful not to allow this to become nagging. Yes, don't under-communicate. Yes, for sure. But if you're sitting there nagging and reminding and, hey, did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? Did you do this? That is also not helpful. Communicating in its perfect state is something that brings life and energy. It can certainly take for a season, but ultimately it should always sharpen the other person, and they should feel better about it. That's one of the pieces to talk through. How am I coming across right now? Am I coming across loving? Ask your spouse that. Ask them. That's how you can become a better communicator.
They'll give you an answer. I'm sure they have one.
There's no secret sauce to this apart from time and diligence. Be intentional. Be intentional with your communication. Be intentional with your approach. Be intentional with the way that you love your spouse. Not all people are loved the same. Ask. I think that's probably the biggest thing that Lauren's alluding to as well, is a lot of people, I think they're thinking through like, oh, this weird like sex thing. It's not that. It's, when I got home, did you acknowledge that I walked through the door? And was there any element of intimacy when I see you each and every day? And if you go days on end, because the kids and bills and health issues and all of those things, if you never have a moment of intimacy, and we're not just talking about intercourse here, we're just talking moments of sacrificial attention, of saying, I want you to feel fulfilled.
That's something that Phil had to communicate to me. something that was important to him, and that was when he comes home from work, he wants me to acknowledge that he's there by doing something physical, which ultimately means standing up, going over and hugging him, saying, "How was your day?" Just showing that, like, I acknowledge that you're home, I'm glad you're home, I'm happy you're home. Give him a hug, give him a kiss. Usually, something physical shows him that I care about him. And when I approach him as he enters our home that way, our communication is so much better. And he had to communicate that expectation to me. He had to say, "Hey, when I get home, I would really appreciate it if you did this." A lot of people in a relationship are too scared to speak up and say that that's what they want from their spouse. But once you do, and the other person understands what you need from them, that makes everything so much better because you're just received with love. So I cannot make this video without just saying very quickly, which could be an entire other video, but this is probably, maybe we'll do another video because this is very important. But at the end of the day, if you are a Christian, you need to be praying with your spouse. At the end of a hard conversation, at the end of a good conversation, at the end of any conversation, pray with your spouse. It will make your communication 10 million times better. I guarantee it. It has transformed our communication. It has transformed our intimacy, our relationship, our spirituality. If you aren't in the habit of doing that, that is my number one advice to you as a couple. So, that being said, the baby's hungry. Thank you for watching, and we'll talk to you later, Ren Fam. Bye.
Bye.